Imagine forging your identity in the furnace of the 1930s to 1950s Hollywood, where dreams shimmered brighter than the California sun, but the shadows they cast were long, deep, and unforgiving. This wasn't just show business. This was survival. Behind the velvet curtains and marquee lights stood a generation of actors whose beauty and charisma masked the battle scars etched into their souls. They bled for their art, some literally, leaping from horseback, swallowing fire, collapsing from exhaustion under blinding set lights. They fought the studios, the headlines, the bottle, and themselves. These weren't just stars, they were warriors, gladiators in satin gowns and tailored suits, locked in eternal conflict with an industry that loved them only while they were golden. Today we count down 10 of the toughest, most dedicated actors of the Golden Age. You know some of their names, others might surprise you, but all of them endured more than fame could ever repay. So sit back, dim the lights, and step into the dressing rooms, alleyways, and hospital beds of those who didn't just act. They suffered, triumphed, and bled for the stories we still remember. The Golden Age Assembly Line. The Golden Age of Hollywood, roughly spanning the 1930s through the 1950s, was more than an era. It was a machine, a finely tuned, smoke-belching apparatus of glamour and power, fed daily by the raw energy of men and women who learned very early that fame had a steep price tag. These weren't simply actors. They were cogs in the studio system, under ironclad contracts with their names, images, voices, even waistlines, owned by the moguls behind the curtain. Dedication meant more than just showing up to set. It meant transforming who you were, often who you loved and what you believed, for a chance to be someone else on screen. Toughness? That was the minimum requirement. Physical injury, emotional trauma, relentless schedules, and public scrutiny weren't rare. They were normal. They worked under heat lamps that left their skin blistered, memorized pages of rewrites handed to them minutes before the director yelled, "Action!" Smiled through broken marriages, mental breakdowns, and painkillers that dulled everything but the need to keep performing. Some endured brutal studio punishments for daring to speak out or fall in love with the wrong co-star, and yet they stayed. Not because it was easy, but because something inside them refused to break. Each name on this list is more than a headline or a Hollywood star. They were forged in fire. They fought to control their narratives, their bodies, their time, their craft, against odds we can barely imagine today. This is our countdown of the 10 toughest and most dedicated actors of Hollywood's Golden Age. Their stories are not just of grit and glory. They are emotional epics of what it truly meant to endure behind the lens. The curtain is rising. Let's begin our journey with number 10. Number 10, Jean Harlo, the Platinum Phoenix. To the world, Jean Harlo was the incandescent, blonde bombshell, a sex symbol carved from light and silk who could seduce an entire theater with a single smirk. But behind the shimmer of satin gowns and peroxide curls lay a story of pain, perseverance, and unyielding dedication that Hollywood tried to cover in powder and gloss. Born Harlean Carpenter in 1911, Harlo didn't want to be an actress. It was her mother, the ambitious Mother Jean, who pushed her into the spotlight. And once there, Jean learned the rules fast. Smile wider, speak softer, work harder. By the time she landed her breakout in Hell's Angels, 1930, directed by the exacting Howard Hughes, Harlo had already been hardened by the cruelty of the casting couch and the suffocating grip of studio expectations. She was expected to be radiant on set, no matter what was happening off camera. What was happening off camera? A failed marriage. A second marriage to MGM executive Paul Byrne that ended in his shocking and mysterious suicide just 2 months after the wedding. Studio spun a web of lies to protect its investment, and Harlo, devastated and traumatized, was told to keep smiling. She did. She kept working, despite chronic health issues, fatigue, and grief. When filming Saratoga in 1937, Jean was visibly unwell, bloated, pale, in constant pain, but she insisted on showing up. She collapsed mid-shoot. Days later, she was gone. Kidney failure. She was 26. And yet, her dedication never faltered. Even as her body gave out, her spirit clung to the work. She wasn't just tough, she was relentless. And tragically, her death marked the beginning of an archetype, the studio-made goddess who paid the ultimate price for perfection. Number 9. Spencer Tracy. The Torn Titan. Spencer Tracy didn't explode onto the screen. He burned, slow, deep, and smoldering. To audiences, he was the quintessential everyman, honest, grounded, commanding with a whisper. But behind that calm exterior was a furnace of personal torment and sheer, unrelenting work ethic that would define his legacy and consume him. Born in Milwaukee in 1900, Tracy had the kind of face that looked carved from moral authority. And yet he carried with him a soul constantly at war. From his early years, he struggled with dyslexia, a condition poorly understood at the time which filled him with shame and rage. That fight never left him, it just found a new battleground in the studio system. His performances were legendary, yes. 2 back-to-back Academy Awards, collaborations with Katharine Hepburn that redefined on-screen chemistry. But few knew that Tracy never watched his own films. He couldn't bear to. He hated seeing himself. He thought he was a fraud. His dedication, unquestionable. He would immerse himself completely into every role. Never flashy, never artificial. He memorized not only his lines but everyone else's. Directors loved him. Co-stars feared him. If you weren't working at his level, he'd make you feel it. But he was also battling demons with every step. Alcoholism stalked him for most of his life. He was a tortured Catholic, guilt-ridden about his extramarital affair with Hepburn, and devastated by the fact that his son, John, was born deaf. Tracy never divorced his wife, but lived a double life with Hepburn for 26 years. He once said, "Acting is not an art. It's a mistake to think it is." Yet no one mistook Spencer Tracy's performances for anything less than soul-bearing truth. He gave everything to the screen, and in return, it gave him immortality, though never peace. Number 8. Bette Davis. The warrior in lace. If Hollywood had a throne for the most fearless fighter in heels, Bette Davis didn't just sit on it. She built it, stone by stone, with grit, intelligence, and defiance. She wasn't just an actress. She was a storm wrapped in silk, and no one, no man, no mogul, was going to tell her how to shine. Born Ruth Elizabeth Davis in 1908, she arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s with a face that confounded the studios. She wasn't a pinup. She wasn't classically beautiful. Her eyes were too sharp, her mouth too expressive, but that was her power. Davis brought a raw, mercurial energy to the screen that was undeniable, dangerous even. She was the first woman to sue Warner Brothers in 1936, at the height of their power, over the suffocating contracts that trapped actors into one-dimensional roles. "I will not be told what to play," she declared. Though she lost a lawsuit, she won something far greater: respect. From that point on, studios knew Bette Davis wasn't to be tamed. Her performances in Jezebel, Now, Voyager, and All About Eve weren't just roles. They were battles. She inhabited complex, wounded, often unlikable women with such ruthless honesty that audiences had no choice but to feel for them. Behind the scenes, she was no less intense. She memorized entire scripts, not just her own lines, so she could better control the rhythm of scenes. She clashed with directors, demanded retakes, and fought for better material. Her marriages crumbled, her children distanced, but Davis kept working, right through illnesses and heartbreak. Even as roles dried up, she didn't fade. She clawed her way back with Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, reinventing herself with terrifying brilliance. Toughness wasn't just a part of Bette Davis, it was her language, and she spoke it fluently. Number 7. Carrie Grant, the masked marvel. To the world, Carrie Grant was effortless, every gesture smooth, every smile impeccable. He wore tuxedos like second skin and tossed witty lines like confetti. But beneath the suave charm and debonair persona lived a man who crafted his identity with excruciating discipline, brick by invisible brick. Born Archibald Leach in Bristol, England in 1904, his journey to becoming Carrie Grant was no transformation. It was resurrection. His childhood was marked by abandonment and lies. His mother was institutionalized when he was 9, and he was told she was dead. That wound never fully healed. The boy who ran away with a traveling acrobat troupe would spend the rest of his life trying to become someone the world would never leave behind. He arrived in Hollywood with nothing but ambition and acrobatic grace. The studios didn't immediately know what to do with him, but Archibald knew. He created Carrie Grant, a name, an accent, a demeanor so refined it felt predestined, but it was all an invention, and it took relentless work. He wasn't just a pretty face. Grant did his own stunts. Years of acrobatic training gave him the agility to leap, roll, and hang from great heights in thrillers like North by Northwest. He'd shoot for hours in freezing water, climb rooftops, deliver pitch-perfect timing in screwball comedies, and still insist on doing the next take because he knew he could make it better. Behind the smile, he battled depression, insecurity, and identity crises. He underwent hundreds of LSD therapy sessions in the 1950s to find the real me, as he put it. The man everyone wanted to be never quite knew who he was, but one thing was certain. Carrie Grant showed up, perfectly dressed, perfectly professional, endlessly watchable. He made it look easy, but it never was. Number 6. Claudette Colbear, the perfectionist powerhouse. Claudette Colbear wasn't loud. She didn't storm into rooms or headline scandals, but she was as tough as they came. A silent strategist in an industry that demanded women be pliant. Where others cracked under pressure, Claudette calculated, and in that precision lay her power. Born Émilie Claudette Chauchoin in France in 1903, she arrived in America as a young girl and soon developed a crisp, cosmopolitan persona. Her voice, her poise, and her impeccable instincts set her apart in the early talkie era. She was smart, and she knew the game. In an era when most actresses were considered interchangeable, Colbear carved out her own rules. She insisted on being filmed from her left side only, believing it was her more flattering angle. Cinematographers grumbled, but Colbear didn't care. She was right, and her command of the lens turned that stubbornness into legend. Her role in It Happened One Night, a performance that would win her an Oscar, was one she initially didn't want. She took the part grudgingly, shot in just 4 weeks, then went off on vacation assuming it would be forgotten. Instead, it became one of the greatest romantic comedies in film history. But here's the secret. She made it work because she always showed up fully, whether she loved the script or not. Colbear was known to learn everyone's lines, tweak her wardrobe herself, and even shift lighting angles if she felt the scene demanded it. She refused to be underestimated. When the war came, she toured with the USO. When television arrived, she adapted. Her dedication wasn't noisy, but it was unshakable. In the marble corridors of old Hollywood, where women were often dismissed once they hit 40, Claudette Colbear quietly kept working. Sharp, professional, and always in control. Number 5. Gary Cooper, the silent strength. Gary Cooper didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight for the camera or devour his co-stars. He just stood there, tall, quiet, watchful, and something shifted. It was his stillness that made the world lean in. But that calm exterior masked a lifetime of physical punishment, emotional discipline, and a commitment to authenticity that bordered on spiritual. Born Frank James Cooper in Montana in 1901, he was raised with Western grit in his blood. Horses, guns, open fields. That wasn't costume for him, it was history. He came to acting by accident after a car accident cut short his dream of being a commercial artist. But Hollywood saw something it couldn't manufacture: realness. Cooper insisted on doing his own stunts in the early days, many of them dangerous. He was thrown from horses, bruised, bloodied, broken, and yet never complained. "You're being paid," he'd say, "so do the job." That ethos carried through his entire career. In High Noon, the role that would define him, Cooper plays a man abandoned by his town and forced to face a gang alone. What most don't know is that while filming, Cooper was in excruciating pain. He had a bleeding ulcer, his back throbbed from years of abuse, but he carried the film anyway, just as his character carried the weight of justice. It was more than a role, it was a reflection. Personally, Cooper battled a quieter war. He was torn between his devout Catholic faith and a series of complicated affairs, including one with Patricia Neal that nearly cost him everything. He wrestled with guilt, with fame, and with the feeling that he never quite fit the leading man mold, despite being one of the biggest stars of his generation. But his dedication never wavered. Even as illness crept in later in life, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, he kept working. He won his second Oscar just months before his death, accepting it with that same low-key dignity that defined him. Gary Cooper didn't roar. He endured. And in Hollywood, that kind of toughness is the rarest of all. Number 4. Joan Crawford, the Queen of Control. Joan Crawford was not born into glamour. She carved it into herself. With a chisel made of sheer willpower and a heart that refused to stop pounding, she rose from poverty, abandonment, and scandal to become one of the most enduring and fearsome icons of the Golden Age. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in 1904, she endured a brutal childhood marked by instability and trauma. Her escape? Dance. She scrubbed floors at a boarding school just to keep attending, then clawed her way through chorus lines before being spotted by MGM scouts. They changed her name and bleached her past, but Lucille never left. She just put on armor and called it Joan Crawford. Her rise wasn't talent alone, it was obsession. Crawford studied herself in the mirror, rehearsing expressions until they were perfect. She'd watch her dailies frame by frame, analyzing posture, lighting, angles. She was notorious for calling for retakes, not to outshine others but to meet her own brutal standards. And her toughness wasn't just cosmetic. She worked herself to the bone. On the set of Mildred Pierce, the role that resurrected her career and won her an Oscar, she fought the studio, the director, and her own fading star power. She insisted on grueling rehearsals, costume redos, and emotional depth. The result? A performance so sharp it cut through the years of being labeled washed up, but Joan's real battle was off-screen, with loneliness, betrayal, and a constant fear of irrelevance. She adopted 4 children in an attempt to build the family she never had, but even that ended in tragedy. Her daughter, Christina, later accused her of abuse in the infamous memoir, Mommy Dearest, a claim Joan never lived to refute. Still, Crawford worked. Long past the era when her peers faded into retirement, she pushed forward. Through horror films, cameos, even Pepsi boardrooms after marrying the company's CEO, she refused to be forgotten. Joan Crawford wasn't just tough, she was survival personified, a living monument to reinvention, image, and the unforgiving price of never letting yourself be anything less than perfect. Number 3. John Wayne, the man who became myth. John Wayne didn't just star in westerns. He was the West, a towering figure with a gait like a rolling storm and a voice like gravel over gunpowder. Wayne became the very image of American masculinity. But what the public didn't see behind the bravado was a man who forged his legend through chronic pain, punishing work schedules, and an unbreakable devotion to a persona he never dared step out of. Born Marion Morrison in 1907, he played football at USC until an injury derailed that path. The studios saw something rugged in him, a quiet intensity, a physicality that could fill a screen. But for nearly a decade, Wayne toiled in B-movies, doing every stunt, riding every horse, bruising his body for low pay and little recognition. His big break came with Stagecoach in 1939, but it wasn't until the 1950s and 60s that the Duke fully emerged as a cinematic force. And from then on, John Wayne was John Wayne. No room for frailty, no cracks allowed in the armor. He was fiercely committed to authenticity. He refused stunt doubles when possible, even as the years added wear to his body. On The Alamo, which he also directed and financed, he spent sleepless nights managing logistics, battling studios, and sacrificing his own health for a film he believed in. His toughness was also literal. He filmed The Conqueror near a nuclear testing site in Utah, a decision that would haunt the cast for years, as many later developed cancer, including Wayne himself. Diagnosed with lung cancer in 1964, he underwent surgery that removed an entire lung and 2 ribs. Most thought he'd never act again, but Wayne returned, leaner, slower, rasping, but still standing. He made True Grit and finally won his Oscar. He called cancer the Big C and refused to let it beat him publicly. Later, as stomach cancer spread, he worked until his body physically couldn't anymore. John Wayne was a symbol of American resilience, but he paid for that symbolism with his own, and to the very end, he stayed in character, not because he had to, but because he believed he owed it to us. Now brace yourself. At number 2, we meet someone whose toughness was not in physical battles, but in the war she waged against time, typecasting, and the patriarchy. She broke rules, hearts, and ceilings. And yet, few know just how hard she had to fight. Number 2, The Invisible Fortress. No warnings, no armor, no studio tagline to gild the image. At first glance, she was elegance itself, but behind the poised smile, hidden from the spotlight, pulsed an impossible toughness, an invisible fortress built not on fame, but on sheer endurance, defiance, and a singular devotion to truth. Born in 1907 as Katharine Hepburn, she entered Hollywood casting herself as the outsider. Tall, unconventional, unglamorous by studio standards. Time and again, she was deemed difficult. But she was just herself. When other actresses bent to studio demands, she stood her ground. Blunt, witty, unashamed. Her breakthrough came with Morning Glory, 1933, which won her an Oscar. Yet, studios saw a rebel, not a commodity. She refused publicity stunts, ignored makeup rules, and even hung laundry on set if she pleased, declaring, "If you didn't like it, that was too damn bad." Each of her 4 Oscars would come only after she fought for dignity, respect, and above all, control. In an era when actresses were discarded at 35, Hepburn thrived well past. She refused romances that would gum up her freedom, except the oceanic one with Spencer Tracy. She rejected being cast as a doting wife or glam doll. By her 40s and 50s, many roles were closed to her, but she fought and won, with bold parts in The African Queen, Long Day's Journey into Night, and on Golden Pond. She won her final Oscar at 67, the oldest woman to do so at the time. Her toughness wasn't loud. She faced it quietly, daily, living with Spencer Tracy for 26 years without marriage, an open secret that could ruin lesser stars. She watched as tabloids shouted betrayal. She bore the loss of Tracy's declining health. Through it all, she continued to work, took no time off, kept making films and smaller TV projects on her terms. In private, she wrote letters to presidents, campaigned for equality, refused to be typecast, and kept her mental health intact. She laughed alone. She built her own career, her own home, her own happiness. When people say Hepburn was difficult, what they mean is she refused to yield to demands that would dilute her spirit. True toughness isn't shouts or battles. It's persistent boundary setting in a world bent on shrinking you. For Hepburn, that world was the studios, the press, and every image maker who wanted to mold her into someone else. She didn't just survive. She made them survive on her terms. And when I say this number 2 reveal is shocking, it's because this quiet rebellion, this unspoken war, is the most audacious, relentless run of toughness any actor dared in the Golden Age. Number 1, Humphrey Bogart, the last man standing. At the summit of the Golden Age, amid the fog of noir and the sparkle of old studio lights, one man stood with a cigarette dangling from his lip and defiance etched into every wrinkle of his face. He wasn't the tallest, he wasn't the prettiest, but he was unbreakable, and that made him a star. Humphrey Bogart didn't glide into stardom. He fought his way there. Born in 1899 to a cold, upper-crust New York family, he was expelled from prep school and sent to the Navy, where he developed the gravelly edge that would define him. He floundered for years in thankless studio roles, gangsters, second-rate villains, before the Maltese Falcon finally gave him room to breathe. And from there, he never looked back. Bogart was the embodiment of dedication. He memorized his scripts obsessively, showed up early, worked sick, and stood his ground against the studios. He wasn't afraid to challenge directors. He demanded rewrites when the story didn't make sense. And though he was a studio product, he never let them own him. He chain-smoked through every shoot, suffered chronic pain, battled insomnia. His drinking was legendary, but so was his stamina. While other actors let the studio polish their image, Bogart leaned into the wear. The dark circles, the hoarse voice, the hunched shoulders, all became part of his power. In Casablanca, he was 43, balding, and far from the romantic ideal, yet he became the most iconic leading man of the era. Why? Because he didn't act like a hero. He acted like a man who'd been through something, and survived it, just like he did off-screen. His love for Lauren Bacall was a revelation, but it didn't soften him. Even as cancer ravaged his body in the 1950s, Bogart refused to stop working. He filmed The Harder They Fall with a voice so strained it could barely carry. But still, he carried the film. When he died at 57, they buried him with a small gold whistle Bacall had once given him, engraved with their secret line, "If you want anything, just whistle." Humphrey Bogart wasn't just tough, he was timeless. And in the end, his dedication outlived his fame, his face, even his voice. All that remains is the legacy of a man who showed us how to endure and made it look cool doing it. These 10 titans of Golden Age Hollywood gave more than performances. They gave themselves. They endured blinding lights, endless takes, rewritten lives, and remolded souls, all in service of stories that would outlive them. And for every smile they gave the screen, there was a price paid in shadows. Toughness isn't always loud. Dedication isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's crawling to set after heartbreak. Sometimes it's demanding your dignity in a room full of power. And sometimes it's knowing who you are in a world that keeps trying to rename you. These weren't just actors. They were architects of myth, prisoners of image, warriors of the lens. And now they are legends. So the next time you watch them, don't just see the glamour. See the grit, because behind every golden frame is a story forged in fire.